It's 12 o'clock. In just a moment, we're going to take you live to the Commons for Prime Minister's questions. First, I'm joined by our political editor, Beth Rigby. Beth, first PMQ since the Easter break. Lots to talk about, obviously.
Yeah, lots to talk about for the Prime Minister here and lots for Kemi Badenoch to go on. There's questions around defence funding. I imagine he might be quizzed on that. Is there a shortfall? When is the government going to put out the review? What is he going to say? There's also questions around the Iran war and the knock-on for the economy, with the IMF giving the UK the biggest downgrade out of all of the G7 nations this week. The Chancellor in Washington for talks at the moment. I imagine he'll also say something about the Southport inquiry, about the tragic loss of life of those young girls, the report released this week. So there's going to be a packed PMQs, and I think he's on his feet.
And I cannot imagine the pain that it will cause the families of all those affected. We will make the changes needed to honour the victims, the injured and the families. And our thoughts remain with the loved ones of Elsie, Bibi and Alice, and all of those impacted. Mr. Speaker, today marks 37 years since the Hillsborough disaster, when 97 men, women and children went to a football match and never returned. My promise remains, working with families, we will deliver a Hillsborough law to end the injustice that they have suffered and ensure the state will always act for the people that it serves. This morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister was right to resist us being drawn into an ill-conceived war in the Middle East, with apparently no clear plan for how it may end. And despite the welcome cost of living support he referenced in his statement on Monday, we are all rightly angry that our constituents will feel the impact of this war in their pockets and in their daily lives. Can he outline what steps he is taking both to support our armed forces and to plan for all future contingencies? We all hope for a swift resolution and progress at the summit later this week, but must be prepared for all potential scenarios.
Prime Minister.
Can I thank my honourable friend, the Royal Engineers in her constituency, and all those serving our country at home and abroad. We're proud to be investing a record £9 billion to deliver quality homes that they deserve. We're turning around army recruitment after the party opposite missed targets for 14 years. But the foremost responsibility to our armed forces are the decisions we take on military actions. My principles are clear. That's a sharp contrast to the Leader of the Opposition, who wanted to jump into the war with both feet without thinking through the consequences.
Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, that was a very interesting answer from the Prime Minister. Lord Robertson, who authored the government's Strategic Defence Review, has said the Prime Minister has a corrosive complacency when it comes to defence. Why did he say that?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me start by saying I respect Lord Robertson, and I thank him again. I thank him again for carrying out the strategic review. My responsibility is to keep the British people safe, and that is a duty I take seriously. That is why I don't agree with his comments. Last February, that was 7 months after taking office, I took the decision to increase defence spending from 2.3 to 2.6%, paid for by a difficult decision on overseas aid. Last June, at the NATO summit, I committed to raising core defence spending to 3.5%. Last November, Mr. Speaker, the budget committed record funding to defence. I reaffirm those commitments now. The Strategic Defence Review is a 10-year blueprint for national security. The Defence Investment Plan will put that into effect. It will be published as soon as possible. We need to get it right. We inherited plans that were uncosted and undeliverable, and we're not going to repeat those mistakes.
Mr. Speaker, he says he doesn't agree with Lord Robertson. Lord Robertson is a former Labour Defence Secretary, a former NATO Secretary-General. He also said, and I quote, "We are underprepared, we are underinsured, we are under attack." He said said...
Order. Sorry? Yeah. I don't think it looks good, shouting somebody down at the dispatch box.
Mr. Speaker, Lord Robertson's criticisms were of the Prime Minister, and he said Britain's national security is in peril. Our armed forces are at the end of their tether, waiting for this government to fund the Strategic Defence Review. There are still 2 weeks of the parliamentary session left. So why wouldn't the Prime Minister publish the Defence Investment Plan before then?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I remind the House that we put in place the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the Cold War. Mr. Speaker, let me spell that out. That means we're spending £270 billion over this Parliament. That's £5 billion more this year, with defence funding increasing every year. These are record amounts, Mr. Speaker, decisions of a Labour Prime Minister, a Labour Chancellor and a Labour government. And what a contrast. When they came into office, defence spending was 2.5%. When they left, it was 2.3%. When they came into office, the army was 100,000. When they left office, 72,000. They cut frigates and destroyers by 25%. They cut mine hunters by 50%. She said at the weekend, our defence is the weakest for 400 years. That is what they left behind.
Mr. Speaker, he's talking about the biggest sustained increase. Talking about an increase is not the same as giving an increase. The military and the defence industry want to hear about what he's going to do, not him prosecuting past governments. He promised the Defence Investment Plan would be published. He promised that the Defence Investment Plan would be published last autumn. I asked him at PMQs 6 weeks ago when it would be published. He had no idea. It is now the middle of April. What's the hold-up?
Mr. Speaker, I've set out my position. The Defence Investment Plan is the first line-by-line review of defence budgets for 18 years. She talks about talking. If you're going to support and make your country safe, you have to get the right calls on the big issues. She called for us to jump into the war. They could pretend otherwise. I remember walking in, standing here for the first time, saying we would not get drawn into the war, we would not join the offensive, and they all shouted, shame. They remember it. I remember it. They're just embarrassed by it now. A week later, when she realised she'd made a massive error of judgment, she attempted the mother of all U-turns. That didn't work. So this weekend, she said, when I said we should jump into the war, she said this weekend, Mr. Speaker, that what she meant, she was talking about verbal support.
Prime Minister, it's Prime Minister's questions. We've got to concentrate.
Just answer the question.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister loves to misrepresent my position on Iran. He does. He loves to misrepresent it. Let's stop talking about what I didn't say. Let's start talking about what he isn't doing. Mr. Speaker, you will recall that on Monday, I offered to work with the Prime Minister to identify the welfare savings we need. What did he say? No thanks. Now that Lord Robertson has said, and I quote, we cannot defend Britain with an ever-expanding welfare budget. Will the Prime Minister think again and work with us to find savings to fund defence?
Prime Minister.
She was clear in what she was saying. She said we should give verbal support. I suppose that's standing on the side and saying, get in there, good luck, mate, you've got this. Mr. Speaker, that is her proof. We are reforming welfare and spending more on defence. They did neither. The welfare bill rose by £88 billion on their watch. It soared by £33 billion under the shadow Chancellor's watch. We're fixing it. What did they do? They voted against it. They voted to keep the broken system. So taking advice from the party opposite on reforming welfare and defence spending is like asking Liz Truss how to keep your mortgage down.
This is so poor from the Prime Minister. This is. Labour MPs are laughing. Labour MPs are laughing, Mr. Speaker. This is a moment of profound national seriousness. And what are they doing? They're promoting sex toys in Parliament. That's what they're doing. Mr. Speaker, yeah, it gives a whole new meaning to fiddling while Rome burns. Mr. Speaker, it is being... That's what they're doing, Mr. Speaker. Let's get back to the issue of the Defence Investment Plan and defence spending. It is being reported that the Treasury is asking the MOD to make £3.5 billion worth of cuts this year. He won't fund our military because he wants to fund more welfare. That's why he has a welfare plan to 2031, but no defence investment plan at all. Now that the Chagos surrender deal is dead, will the Prime Minister put the billions saved from ditching Chagos into defence, or is that going into welfare as well?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are spending more on defence. Record amounts on defence. £270 billion in this Parliament, £5 billion extra. And she talks about the Chancellor. It's because of the decisions of this Chancellor that we've got the biggest boost to defence spending since the Cold War. We've also got the biggest pay rise for our armed forces for over 20 years. We've also got the biggest investment in military housing for over half a century. What did they do at the budget? They voted against all of that.
That sounds like he doesn't want to spend the Chagos money on defence. Well, Mr. Speaker, Labour MPs will know Lord Robertson, a former Defence Secretary, a former NATO Secretary General. He is Labour through and through. They all need to think about why he stuck his head above the parapet. I went through the Strategic Defence Review with Lord Robertson last year. The Lib Dems and Reform refused to meet him. No other party is taking this seriously. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the Prime Minister a very specific question. In January 2024, Conservatives approved an upgrade of destroyers like HMS Dragon so they can better intercept ballistic missiles. In July 2024, the Prime Minister paused that plan. Will he immediately approve and fund that critical upgrade now?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Dragon was commissioned by a Labour government, as it happened. But she stands there and says, please forget the fact that we hollowed out the armed forces. Please clear up our mess. I went to the Gulf last week and thanked our armed forces for protecting British lives. She said we should have jumped into the war without thinking about the consequences. Then said, oh, no, we shouldn't be in the war the next week. Now she says, what I meant was we should give verbal support.
Order. The front bench, I expect them to be quiet here. I also expect it, but it's the same people. I suspect next week you won't be in for PMQs if it carries on. Prime Minister.
In addition to saying her position is we should just say to Americans, get in there, she insulted our armed forces, Mr. Speaker, saying they were just hanging around. These were pilots who, within 2 hours of this conflict, were up, risking their lives, taking missiles out of the sky. And she insulted them. And she's never apologised for that. She said a few weeks ago that serious times call for serious people. She is not one of them.
Ian Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Prime Minister said, 37 years today, 97 innocent children, women and men went to a football match and were unlawfully killed at the hands of a corrupt state. I was at Hillsborough and I was one of the lucky ones who survived and walked away. As parliamentary lead to the Hillsborough Law, I stand here with a huge sense of obligation to the 97, all the families, including my constituent Debbie Matthews, every survivor and every victim of a state cover-up, who were all part of this collective campaign. There are signs of progress after last night's government concessions, but we've heard this before. Prime Minister, this is your responsibility. It is within your power to take control of this process and make good on your promise to deliver this legislation. So will you commit today to ruling out any carve-out for security services and finally delivering a full Hillsborough Law worthy of the name, or will they be failed by the state once again.
Prime Minister.
Well, I know, as my honourable friend has just said, that he himself was at Hillsborough. And can I thank him for his decades of campaigning for justice. I am personally committed to working with the families to get this bill right. It is integral that their views are heard. We're discussing this precise issue with the families, and we'll make sure that he is fully updated. I reaffirm my commitment to delivering the legislation, to ensuring the duty of candour applies to all public servants.
Sir David, Leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I echo the words of the Prime Minister about the Southport inquiry and also the 37th anniversary of the Hillsborough tragedy? Our thoughts are with all the families affected and the survivors, and I hope he will deliver on the Hillsborough law. Today, Mr. Speaker, also marks the 3rd anniversary of the start of the devastating civil war in Sudan. I hope he will recommit to real action in the face of the world's greatest humanitarian catastrophe. Mr. Speaker, in a phone call with Sky News last night, President Trump has threatened to rip up his trade deal with the UK as punishment for us not joining his idiotic war in Iran. Mr. Speaker, this must be the last straw. Surely the Prime Minister can't send our King to meet a man who treats our country like a mafia boss running a protection racket.
Minister.
Can I join him in his comments about Sudan? We often overlook the fact this is the greatest humanitarian crisis facing the world at the moment. My position on the Iran war has been clear from the start. We're not going to get dragged into this war. It is not our war. And a lot of pressure has been applied to me to take a different course. And that pressure included what happened last night. I'm not going to change my mind. I'm not going to yield. It is not in our national interest to join this war, and we will not do so. I know where I stand. Mr. Speaker, in relation to the King's visit, the purpose of the visit is to mark the 250th anniversary of relations and independence, obviously, of the US. The monarchy is an important reminder of the long-standing bonds and enduring relationship between our two countries, which are far greater than anyone who occupies any particular office at any particular time.
Sir Ed Davey.
Mr. Speaker, President Trump is one of the most unpredictable people we have seen on the world stage, and I hope he does not embarrass our monarch. But moving on, Mr. Speaker, last year the Prime Minister claimed he'd done some special deal, so Brits will be able to sail through e-gates at EU airports. But that's not the experience of families returning from holiday this week. Long queues at borders and passport controls are the latest symbol of the Brexit disaster. But they're also a symbol of this government's failure to repair that damage. So will the Prime Minister apologise for misleading British travellers? And can he tell them when they will be able to sail through passport control?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've made it very clear that I think our national interest lies in close relationship with the EU on defence, security, energy and the economy. And I was very pleased that at last year's summit we did negotiate an agreement on e-gates, and we're pushing hard on that. We have another summit this year where I intend not just to make good on what we've already agreed, but to go closer to the EU in the relations that we have.
Joe White.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was promised Prime Minister questions, a meeting with the Prime Minister for myself and Arsenal hero Michael Thomas. We are still waiting, and I cannot back down. Not just have working-class footballers and others lost hundreds of millions to financial mis-selling, but the V11 group is still being pursued by HMRC for tax on money that they have never had. The Post Office and other injustices have been actioned. Why not the V11?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank her for her dedicated campaigning on this really important issue? I have met Michael Thomas and heard his experiences, and I share her concern about young, predominantly working-class people being exploited. I do want to make progress as quickly as possible. I've asked the Chief Secretary to meet the V11 group on what further steps the government can take to support these affected, and I'll make sure that that's reported back to her so she's fully updated on what's going on.
Saoirse Eastwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, 2 years ago, people voted for change. But what have they got? More of the same. But it hasn't been them that have let down their end of the bargain. My constituents are working themselves to the bone. And let's be absolutely clear, they are working and still having to claim benefits. There's not a single section of society, whether it's farmers, care workers, students, you name it, they have been let down. And I don't want that to be the case. We need to show that this House works for them, because actors will step into that space. People would love nothing more than our democracy to be toppled, because we cannot show our people a better way of life. We used to say to people, if you work hard, you get on in life. That hasn't been the case for years. Will this government now change economic and fiscal course and deliver for people in the worst cost of living crisis?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, wages are going up higher in the first year of this Labour government than they did in the 10 years of the party opposite being in power. We've taken the decision at the budget to cut energy bills across the country. I was in Northern Ireland, as she knows, just a few weeks ago, making the announcement about heating oil, which is obviously of huge concern in Northern Ireland, hearing what people had to say, putting in place £53 million. The authorities in Northern Ireland will administer that, but we're looking more widely at what we can do.
Jodie Golfley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under this government, George Eliot Hospital in my constituency is thriving, rapidly soaring up league tables, ending corridor care, and now welcome an expansion to our community diagnostic centre with a new breast cancer diagnosis unit. Yet the same staff delivering this life-saving care for Nuneaton are suffering horrific abuse, much of which appears to be racially motivated. The staff I've met believe that right-wing marchers who don't even live in my town doing Nazi salutes on our high street are fanning the flames of hatred towards their colleagues. Will the Prime Minister join me in condemning acts of violence against the dedicated staff at George Eliot and join me in celebrating their achievements, possibly with a visit to our CDC to see their excellent work and show their deep gratitude for their service and resilience?
Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. Violence against our NHS staff is despicable. And we're introducing a new offence to protect emergency workers from harassment. In terms of the congratulations, can I thank all our hard work of our NHS staff who've delivered 5 million extra appointments in our first year in government. Mr. Speaker, we're going further. This week we've announced 36 new and expanded community diagnostic centres across the country, including expanded services in Nuneaton. That's the difference a Labour government makes.
Gregory Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, there is severe hardship being experienced by businesses, consumers and families right across the United Kingdom. Not just normal cost of living costs, but fuel costs are exceptionally high and getting higher. There are protests being organised as we speak for next week. Prime Minister, we need action delivered as quickly as possible in order to ensure that these protests don't escalate out of control and people see that politics matters, governments listen and take action rather than just offer words.
Can I thank him for his question? I know that his constituents and all of those in Northern Ireland are concerned about the impact that the war in Iran is having on them. I was in Northern Ireland just a few weeks ago where I spoke directly to party leaders and we announced what we're doing in that regard on heating oil. Obviously, fuel duty is frozen until September. Energy bills have been reduced. And we've also made it clear that we wouldn't tolerate profiteering or unfair practices, which was a particular concern raised with me when I was over in Northern Ireland. The most important thing we can do is to de-escalate the conflict and get the Straits of Hormuz open, and that's why I'm co-hosting the summit on Friday in order to make progress on both those fronts.
Patrick Hurley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Prime Minister firstly for his words earlier in relation to the horrific attack in my constituency and also for the work that the government is now doing as a result. The families affected do not want their lives to be defined by the attack, and we must not allow my great town to be defined by it either. That's why I'm asking for the Prime Minister's help to ensure that my town's best days lie ahead of it. My council is helping to bring empty town centre properties back into residential use. It's a much-needed corrective after years of decline and neglect from the previous government. But more needs to be done. So does the Prime Minister agree with me that our town centres need place-based funding And will he back me in my bid for Southport to be included in the next round of Pride in Place support?
Prime Minister.
Can I just say, having sat with him and the families of those impacted in Southport, in his constituency a number of times, can I just thank him for everything that he did and is continuing to do in response to that awful attack? And can I agree with him wholeheartedly that Southport cannot be defined by what happened in that awful, tragic incident, and therefore he is right to have the pride that he does have in his community. I'm delighted we're investing in reopening the iconic Southport Pier. We're investing, Mr Speaker, £5.8 billion through our Pride in Place Fund to cut power and resources and put them into the hands of nearly 300 communities. And only a Labour government will deliver this kind of change.
Ms Cocky.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Speaker. Welfare spending is set to rise by another £70 billion by 2030. And the last time I asked the Prime Minister about this, he said he was mending the system. Well, since then, Mr Speaker, this disastrous Labour government have raised taxes on working people to give even more to those who don't. The people I speak to across Broxbourne think that this Labour government are taking them for mugs. So what does the Prime Minister say to working people across this United Kingdom who are being asked to pay more and are getting less?
I'll tell them they were let down very badly by the last government for 14 years, and we're clearing up the mess.
Julie Binns.
Mr Speaker, in the last week alone, 2 Scottish pensioners have been hospitalised following a collision with an illegal e-bike, and a 10-year-old boy in Grimsby was injured by another. The new Product and Regulation and Metrology Act gives government the power to define these bikes as unsafe and ban them from sale. Will the Prime Minister reassure my Carlisle constituents that the government will use these new powers to rid our streets of the menace of illegal e-bikes?
Well, my honourable friend is a tenacious campaigner on this issue, and I thank her for that. We launched a major programme of reform of the UK's product safety regulation. This will help tackle unsafe products being sold online, including non-compliant e-bikes and the batteries that power them. Mr Speaker, we're also giving the police new powers to take unsafe e-bikes off the roads and destroy them without issuing a warning beforehand.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Yates Station is at the heart of the town's industrial area and can be a gateway to the eastern end of the Western Innovation Arc. Local rail users tell me they want it improved. Businesses stress its importance for attracting a workforce, and in the wake of local manufacturing job losses, its redevelopment could be a catalyst for wider regeneration. There are already proposals in the town's master plan, so will the Prime Minister back jobs growth by supporting the redevelopment of Yates Station?
I can thank the honourable member. We're providing the West of England Combined Authority with over £750 million to invest in their priorities. That could include improving services and station facilities at Yate, and I know she'll make her voice heard in relation to that. I'm pleased construction is already underway at new stations at Charfield and North Filton. We've upgraded the Filton Bank line as well, enabling more frequent, reliable services in the region.
Dr. Peter Prinsley.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I first thank the nurses, the doctors, the radiographers and the receptionists who were not on strike when I tripped and broke my wrist last week. Now, after years of neglect, Labour is rebuilding our NHS, including the West Suffolk Hospital at Bury St Edmunds and the new dental school at the UEA. Now, does the Prime Minister share my genuine alarm, as a surgeon who's worked at the front line for more than 40 years, that the vague social insurance proposals of some of our opponents would be the end of our NHS and seriously threaten the health and well-being of millions of our fellow citizens?
Prime Minister.
Can I wish him a speedy recovery? He obviously speaks with great authority and experience on our NHS, and he's right to point out that waiting lists at the lowest for 3 years, A&E waiting times are the best for 4 years, and ambulance response times are faster for 5 years. That's because of the investment that we put in and they opposed. But I wonder how much my honourable friend would have been charged if he had arrived at a reform hospital under an insurance-based scheme. That would turn the clock back. The NHS is on the road to recovery. Don't risk it with reform.
Slade.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister join me in congratulating Dorset Wildlife Trust and the people of Dorset for their incredible efforts to secure Upton Heath for nature after part of this internationally designated site was put up for sale after decades-old planning consent was being used for mineral extraction? We've worked round the clock to raise hundreds of thousands secured just last night to buy the site, but the value was inflated by this permission from the 1950s, which should never have applied to a site of special scientific interest. Will the Prime Minister demonstrate his government's commitment to nature by committing to legislate to extinguish historic planning consents without compensation on sites that achieve international environmental designation?
Minister.
Can I thank the honourable member, and relevant ministers are happy to discuss with her the specific site that she mentions at greater depth, and reassure her we're committed to protecting our countryside. Our land use framework balances restoring nature with meeting demands of homes and energy. We've just announced £60 million. That's a record amount to support nature and threatened species.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I greatly welcome the government's announcement to open up a youth hub in Luton to help bring together jobs, skills and wellbeing support in one place. So does the Prime Minister agree with me that after years of neglect under the previous Conservative government, it's this Labour government that's investing in the future of our young people?
Can I start by congratulating Luton Town on winning at Wembley? Coached, of course, by Jack Wilshere, a great ex-Arsenal star. I'm delighted her constituency is benefiting from a new youth hub, one of the 80 additional hubs that we're launching across the country. That stark contrast to what we inherited. Over 1,000 youth centres were closed under the Tories. Spending on youth services was slashed by 73%. Labour's bringing youth clubs back, and we're proud to do so, building a better future for our young people.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 25 years on Prince's Risborough High Street, retailer Cado have said they are closing, citing hikes in business rates and the increases on taxation on employing people amongst their reasons. A few yards up on Duke Street, Salon 24 Hair, for the first time in 21 years, cannot afford to take on a new apprentice. How many more businesses need to close, jobs be lost, and apprenticeship opportunities trashed need to happen before this Prime Minister understands that the practical outturn of his policies aren't working?
Well, I'm concerned to hear of those examples. We have put in place support for small businesses, and I'll make sure that's available to him to pass on to his constituents.
Dave Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow night I will be hosting a public meeting about the chronically delayed Burntwood Health Centre. For over a decade, well over a decade, people in my town have been let down by the lack of this replacement facility. We thought there might be light at the end of the tunnel when we were promised it by the end of 2025, but the end of last year came and went, no health centre and not even a planning permission. Will the Prime Minister agree with me that the County Council, now led by Reform, have promised a new health centre to the people of Burntwood, and they must make sure that there are no more broken promises to my constituents?
Prime Minister.
Well, he's a great champion for his constituents, and it's shocking that they've been waiting over a decade for this practice. I agree with him, but sadly, Reform's leadership in Staffordshire is an absolute mess. They've had three leaders in 3 months, one of them forced to step down for appalling racist comments, and they're simply not getting on with the job. He's obviously proud of that. All you can count on for Reform is chaos and division.
Final question, David Simmons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year, my constituents suffered the closure of the urgent care centre at Mount Vernon Hospital. And this year they face the loss of the cancer centre as well, leaving my most vulnerable constituents with long and difficult journeys to access life-saving and life-sustaining treatment. So will he encourage his Health Secretary to join in the U-turns and guarantee the future of Mount Vernon Hospital?
I don't know the particular details of his hospital, but I will make sure that they're looked into. We have put record investment into the NHS, but now he's raised that, I will make sure we look specifically into the case that he's raised here in this House.
Let the front benches change over.
And that was Prime Minister's question, the first one since the Easter break. Beth Rigby, our political editor, is with me. And unsurprisingly there, Beth, a lot of it, certainly at the start, focused on the comments made by Lord Robertson just yesterday, all about defence, saying that the UK is underprepared, underinsured, under attack. So strong words that were definitely picked up, addressed to the Prime Minister and then picked up by Kemi Badenoch.
I mean, look, as I was saying before Prime Minister's questions, this was always going to be difficult for the Prime Minister because Lord Robertson isn't just anyone. He's a former Labour Defence Secretary. And he is also the lead author of the government's defence review. So he's inside the tent. It's not an opponent. It's not the kind of usual lot criticising the government. It's actually someone that Starmer has brought in to help advise him. And Lord Robertson this week said that the Prime Minister had what he described as a corrosive complacency, a lack of interest in defence, and there was an incompatibility of vast welfare spending and supercharging the defence budget. It doesn't really get more stinging than that. And obviously this is very difficult for the Prime Minister. And I was very unsurprised that Kemi Badenoch used this to question the PM. And this was their exchange. I think we can have a listen.
Mr. Speaker, Lord Robertson's criticisms were of the Prime Minister, and he said Britain's national security is in peril. Our armed forces are at the end of their tether, waiting for this government to fund the Strategic Defence Review. There are still 2 weeks of the parliamentary session left. So why won't the Prime Minister publish the Defence Investment Plan before then?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I remind the House that we've put in place the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the Cold War. Mr. Speaker, let me spell that out. That means we're spending £270 billion over this Parliament. That's £5 billion more this year, with defence funding increasing every year. These are record amounts, Mr. Speaker, decisions of a Labour Prime Minister, a Labour Chancellor and a Labour government.
I mean, it didn't surprise me what the Prime Minister said there. There was a commitment to increase defence spending to 3% of GDP in the next Parliament, but clearly we have a conflict in the Middle East. The Ukraine war grinds on, and there are questions about whether or not the defence budget needs to be, as I said, turbocharged. And if you think about post-Cold War, there was what has been described as the peace dividend, where Western nations ran down spending on defence in order to better fund public services. And I think at the heart of Robertson's argument, there's like, do we need as a country, in a non-party political way and partisan way, to discuss that? Now, there's clearly massive, massive disagreements in government as the Ukraine war and now the Iran war is really going to mess with the public finances. As we said, there is a big downgrade of growth this year coming from the International Monetary Fund. And this defence review, it has been delayed 4 months. And the Prime Minister there asked about it, said, I want to get it right. And I won't put out what we're going to do until I can fund it. But this is because behind the scenes there are big rows going on about between the Treasury and the Defence Department, with the Prime Minister mediating about what funds are available. So this is really uncomfortable for the Prime Minister, and it is another demand on public spending, and there are difficult choices to make, and he's under growing pressure about that. The other sort of area that was uncomfortable for him was, again, Donald Trump. And Mark Stone got one of those calls with Trump. We know that he sometimes decides to pick up the phone and answer the call. And he answered a call from Mark Stone, our US correspondent, last night. Mark had I think, 5-minute conversation.
Make the most of them.
Make the most of it. And again, there was criticisms about Keir Starmer in that call, and that was picked up by Ed Davey, the leader of the Lib Dems. So let's have a listen to that exchange too.
In a phone call with Sky News last night, President Trump has threatened to rip up his trade deal with the UK as punishment for us not joining his idiotic war in Iran?
My position on the Iran war has been clear from the start. We're not going to get dragged into this war. It is not our war. And a lot of pressure has been applied to me to take a different course. And that pressure included what happened last night. I'm not going to change my mind. I'm not going to yield. It is not in our national interest to join this war, and we will not do so. I know where I stand.
And, you know, Beth, the Prime Minister seems really confident there because, of course, there's been a lot of surprise, to say the least, at some of the things that Donald Trump says. And so now this almost seems to be playing in his favour.
Yeah, I mean, look, what did Donald Trump say to Mark Stone? He said the special relationship has been better. It was in a sad state. He said, of the UK, we gave them a good trade deal, better than I had to. He also said we can always change that. So a threat there. But actually, for Keir Starmer, what he did there was what I expected him to do, which was trot out the lines he's been making, which is, you know, as he said to me in an interview a couple of weeks ago, I will not buckle. And as time has gone on and the Trump criticisms have continued, the Prime Minister is actually using this now for political advantage, because when you look at polling of the British public, there was a recent poll by YouGov that said over 4 out of 5 Brits disagreed with Trump. They don't like what he's saying. They don't like his attacks on the UK. Only 14% of Brits in support. And interestingly, Nigel Farage, who's been one of Trump's biggest cheerleaders, I interviewed him this week. I said to him, have you now got a Trump problem? Is it no longer an asset but a liability? He said, I don't have a Trump problem. But then he spent quite a lot of our interview trying to distance himself from Trump, not disavowing him, but saying it's about the relationship with America rather than the relationship with Trump. So he sees the writing on the wall. And then for Ed Davey has worked out that being the kind of criticiser-in-chief of the commander-in-chief of the US is great political currency for him. So just expect him to keep going with that. But from a prime ministerial point of view, he's gone as far as he will, I think, in terms of he will keep saying, I'm standing my ground, try not to make it personal. But at the same time, he's still asking the King to go over to celebrate the 250th anniversary of US independence, and that's a big cultural moment. So he still wants to keep the relationship going. But, you know, for Starmer now, it just seems like Trump's endless criticism is kind of water off the back.
And in that call with Mark Stone, actually, the president had very warm words for the King.
Yeah,
so we'll see how.
Warm words for the King. So, you know, and remember when the reopening of Notre Dame, the UK deployed Prince William to that, and he spent a lot of time with Donald Trump. So I think that this is a moment where, when tensions between the two governments, the two leaders are obvious, they are using the royal family and trying to leverage the soft power of that to try and at least ameliorate some of these tensions.
Absolutely. Lots to talk about, but stay with us, because coming up we're going to have our panel of MPs just after the break. Let's get some more reaction now to Prime Minister's questions. Joining us now are Labour's Alex McIntyre, Stuart Andrew from the Conservatives, and Anna Sabine from the Liberal Democrats. Welcome all. Alex, if I can start with you. Obviously, the Prime Minister coming under a lot of pressure about defence spending, especially in light of the comments made by Lord Robertson yesterday.
Well, obviously, Lord Robertson spoke yesterday and he had his story. I think the story that the government is very keen to share is the fact that defence spending is going up. And I think it's really, not fair to say that we haven't invested. We inherited armed forces that have been hollowed out. That was Ben Wallace's, former Defence Secretary's, own words. We aren't going to be able to ramp that up overnight. You can't suddenly go from 2.3%, which is what it was when we took over in terms of GDP, to 3.5%, which is what we've promised to get it up to, overnight. We've seen £5 billion extra this year. And we've launched a strategic defence review, that's reported, and now we need to see the investment plan, which is going to come forward later this year, which will set out how we make sure we spend that money in the right way going forward. What I'm really clear about, what I want to see from it, is that we get the procurement right. We don't have schemes like Ajax, which cost £6 billion and still not being used, that we get the jobs here in the UK, and that we've got the capabilities to fight tomorrow's wars, not yesterday's battles.
OK. I mean, you know, you say that the spending is increasing, and of course it is, but according to Lord Robertson, underprepared, underinsured, under attack. Stuart Andrew, of course, in part, it's your party that was responsible for this.
Well, I think what's really telling here is you have a former Labour Secretary of State for Defence, you know, really inside the tent, as it were, highlighting his real concerns. This is a big thing for him to say this, I think. He clearly is extremely worried about the direction that the government is going, and particularly singling out the Prime Minister. Those are lessons we've got to, or those are words we have to listen to, because we are in the most incredibly dangerous times at the moment, and our defence is absolutely key. Now, I accept that over the period of time, and Ben Wallace wasn't just talking about the Conservatives, he was talking about over a period of decades, we had got a little bit complacent post-Cold War. We are reaping that now, and I accept that, you know, mistakes were made. But we've got to get on with it. I think what's really disappointing is that Kemi has now twice offered the Prime Minister to work together, and he's just brushing it off. That's not very statesmanlike.
To take us into war with Iran.
No, she didn't. This misrepresentation
she said
is really
straight away,
frustrating.
let's go straight in,
really
no questions asked. That wasn't the right call, was it?
There is a real irony of Kemi Babe not picking this as her line of attack, because it's absolutely right to say that the Tories hollowed out our defence, and it's going to take us a long time to get it up to where we need to be. And if she hasn't actually supported the war, she certainly had an incredibly confused position about where she stands on the war. She's certainly generally quite pro-Trump in a way that we certainly haven't been. And so I think for her to stand there criticising, clearly there is an issue, it is a long-term issue, but the government has had, however long we've had in government, coming up for 18 months to produce that defence investment strategy. And we need some really urgent upscaling now, which is why we've called for defence bonds, which would raise £20 billion in quite short order.
I mean, Alex, just to go back to Lord Robertson, it's really uncomfortable. He's a former Labour Defence Secretary. He helped author the review. He's obviously tried to keep his counsel and felt that he has to speak out. That is damning for the Prime Minister. He can say that he respects Lord Robertson, but he disagrees. But, I mean, this is not the usual suspects taking a pop at Keir Starmer for political reasons. This is one of your own. And that underlines, doesn't it, the severity of the situation. And the Prime Minister needs to face up to that, no?
I think Lord Robertson has got a lot of experience in this area, and I don't think necessarily the government disagrees with a lot of what he's saying in terms of we do need to invest in our defence and we do need to ramp that up. I think it's wrong that he said that we are putting the country in peril by not doing so quicker. We are already investing £5 billion more. I think we're keeping this country safe by not jumping into a war that the Conservative Party and Reform would want us to go into in Iran. But I think what's really important is we get it right, because what we can't do over the next 10 years, and that's what this investment plan will cover, is a 10-year period, is get this wrong, because we're talking about investing a substantial amount of money.
Because of the internal arguments within the party. There are reports in the Times from Stephen Swinford, the political editor there, that there is a £10 billion offer from Reeves over 4 years. MOD says it needs 28 billion. We did a report on Sky News with Deborah Haynes, our defence editor, and Sam Coates, our deputy political editor, yesterday, saying that the MOD is being asked for in defence cuts or savings of 3.5 billion this year. Like, there's an internal row here, isn't there?
Well, look, I'm not privy to some of those conversations, but I think what's always going to be discussions behind the scenes within government. There's always tensions between every department and the Treasury to make sure they're getting the right deal. But what I'm really keen to make sure from the investment plans, we get the best deal for the British taxpayer. We've got to make sure this money is spent well. I want to see it invested in creating jobs in places like Gloucester, so that we are making the most of the investment that we're going to have to make in our defence, and making sure that we get the procurement right, because as we've seen with other procurement projects, we haven't always got that right. We need to make sure that we land this, because it's going to be so important going forward.
Obviously, the issue of Trump is at the core almost of all of this. And we had a comment there from Ed Davey, who brought up the call that Donald Trump had with our correspondent Mark Stone, where he talked about ripping up the trade deal. And David, this question to you, Anna, he said, this is time to basically be strong with Trump, something that's easy to say when you're in opposition, less so when you're in government.
Yeah, absolutely. It's easier to say, but it's something that I think the British people feel very strongly about, that we should be standing up to him. A lot of reference has been made to Love Actually, and I think we'd love a bit more.
But isn't Keir Starmer doing that?
I think he's doing that increasingly, but on something like the state visit, we're really concerned. You look at Trump's growing erratic nature of his behaviour. You look at what happened with someone like Zelensky when he went to see the president. We're putting the king in an incredibly invidious position with this state visit, and it would be a really strong message to Trump. We know that he really cares about the monarchy. It's something he places a value on. We don't think the king should be going to the state visit.
I mean, to pull the state visit with a country where, whether or not there are tensions between President Trump and Prime Minister Starmer, our security, our nuclear systems, our intelligence, our defence are so closely intertwined, like institutionally, we are fused together. But is it responsible to kind of blow it up in that way, to exacerbate the tensions?
In normal times, that might be correct. But we have a president who is behaving... He's threatening effectively genocide against another nation on tweets at night. He's saying that he will tear up our trade deal if we don't do what he wants. These are strange times we're living in.
And the Prime Minister has increasingly stood up to him, which you've acknowledged.
He has stood up to him, but what we need is... I think that Trump responds to people being as strong as he is. I think it would kind of blow Trump's mind, frankly, if we pulled the state visit at this point. I think it would cause him real ructions domestically. I think it would send a really strong message that Britain isn't going to be putting up to this. I also think that if something happens with the king, if the king is seriously embarrassed by the state visit, people will go back and go, oh, maybe we shouldn't have done it. And that's the real worry, is the position we're putting the royal family.
I think it's deeply and serious to suggest, this is a massive anniversary for the Americans. We have such a long and special relationship with them that goes far beyond whoever is in political office, whether that's President Trump or Prime Minister Starmer. This relationship goes back decades, and we rely on it every day, whether that's our intelligence, whether that's our defence. That relationship is not going to go away, and we need to make sure that we're maintaining it. And actually, I think the King will do a fantastic job on the state visit. He'll represent the country with aplomb, as he always does. And I think that we need to be really serious about this relationship, because it's so important to us going forward.
But
I would agree with that, because I think, well, the relationship is... Alex is absolutely right. This is a relationship between two nations, and there will be times when the two governments of those nations may fall out. But you don't throw away that strategic relationship because there are tensions within that relationship. And I absolutely have faith in the King, in being able to sort of make sure that it is the focus of the two nations, the two peoples of America.
Do you have faith in Trump doing the same?
I think the King has a great ability here to sort of remind the President that actually it's our two nations' values that are the thing that really matter here.
Because the King is going to address Congress. He's going to make a big speech. It will be a big moment, and he is known for sometimes being quite political when it comes to a monarch. What do you hope he will get across in that speech to Trump? What would you like to see him say?
Well, I think I'd like him to say to the whole American people that, we are much stronger when we stand together. The history between our two nations has been incredible over the decades. And yes, there are times when it's a challenge. All relationships are like that. But to remind that actually when we work together, and particularly in these increasingly challenging times globally, that actually when we do stick together for the values that we believe in, and freedom, of democracy, those are the things that we need to stand for, and I hope that perhaps that will be the message he'll relay.
We're going to have to leave it there. We've run out of time. Stuart Andrew, Alex McIntyre and Anna Sabine. Thank you both all so much. Thank you. And now it's time for a quick look at the weather.